Somewhere in your house right now, there's something you own that does nothing. It doesn't feed you. It doesn't protect you. It doesn't help you survive one single extra day. But you bought it anyway, because of how it makes you look. We assume that's a modern disease. Capitalism, advertising, Instagram. The idea that we'd spend real time and real resources on something with zero survival value feels like a symptom of civilization going soft. But the truth is far older and far stranger than that. The first luxury item in human history wasn't made by us at all. Let's go back. Not thousands of years, not tens of thousands. We're going back 130,000 years, to a cave in Croatia, to a species we still call brutish and primitive, Neanderthals. In 1899, a paleontologist named Dragutin Gorjanovic Kramberger dug 8 talons out of a rock shelter called Krapina, eagle talons, along with one small toe bone. He had no idea what he'd actually found, so he did what most people do with something they don't understand. He put it in a drawer. It sat there for over 100 years. Then in 2013, a curator named Dvorka Radovcic looked at those same claws under a microscope and saw something that shouldn't have been there. Cut marks, polish, smooth facets worn down by constant rubbing against something soft, skin, sinew, fabric. These claws had been worn. Someone had killed a white-tailed eagle, a bird with a wingspan over 2 meters, an apex predator that could rip a person's face open, and they had done it not for food, but for 8 sharp, curved talons to string together and wear. Dated with uranium-thorium testing, the claws came in at 130,000 years old. That's 50,000 to 90,000 years before modern humans even set foot in Europe. Which means jewelry, real, deliberate, dangerous to acquire jewelry, existed before we did. The brutish caveman didn't invent survival tools first. He invented fashion first. But here's where it gets stranger. Because luxury didn't just start with Neanderthals. It might have invented something else entirely, by accident. Fast forward sort of to Kaf Zeh Cave in Israel. Buried in layers dated between 92,000 and 120,000 years old, archaeologists found 10 shells. Not local shells. Sea clams that had to be carried 35 kilometers inland from the coast. Already dead, already empty, completely useless as food. Under a microscope, the holes in those shells showed a very specific kind of wear, the kind caused by a cord rubbing against them, again and again, for years, which means someone strung these shells onto string. And string doesn't just show up. Someone had to invent it, twist it, test it, which means the oldest indirect evidence we have for cordage technology, the invention that would eventually give us bows, nets, fishing lines, and sails, comes from people trying to make jewelry. 4 of the shells were even stained with red ochre, hauled from specific mineral deposits chosen for color alone. Humans didn't invent rope to survive. We invented it to accessorize. Survival just came along for the ride. And it gets darker from here. 43,000 years ago, in the mountains of Eswatini, in a site called Lion Cavern, people started digging. Not for food, not for water, not for metal. For a black, glittering mineral called specularite, sparkling iron ore that, when crushed, turns skin into something that shimmers like it's covered in tiny mirrors. Archaeologists recovered over 30,000 stone tools from that site. Heavy hammer stones carried up a mountain from valleys miles away. Because the right rock for smashing rock didn't exist locally. Over 1,200 tons of ore were pulled out of that mountain by hand. This is the oldest confirmed mining operation on Earth, tens of thousands of years before anyone mined for bronze or iron or gold. The very first industry humans ever built wasn't for tools. It was for glitter, and the cost was real. In an adjoining tunnel, archaeologists found the skeleton of a child, buried in a collapse, dated to over 50,000 years old. A child died mining makeup, so by now you might be thinking this was all vanity, decoration for decoration's sake, a prehistoric obsession with looking good and nothing more. That's the popular reading. And it's wrong. Or at least it's missing the point entirely. Because 33,000 years ago, in the mountains of Lesotho, archaeologists kept finding something that made no geological sense. Beautiful little beads, carved from ostrich eggshell, in a region with no ostriches at all. Strontium isotope testing traced the shells back to their true origin, dry lowlands, 100 to 350 kilometers away. These beads had traveled, which means they'd been traded. Anthropologists connected this to a system still practiced today by the San people of the Kalahari, called haxaro. You give someone a beautiful, labor-intensive object, not because you want something back right now, but because now they owe you. And if your land ever dries up, if a drought wipes out your food for a season, you can walk 300 kilometers to their territory, and they have to take you in. The beads weren't jewelry. They were a survival contract, small enough to wear around your neck. Luxury wasn't decadence. It was insurance. It was the first system of trust between strangers who might never meet again. And then there's Sungir, 200 kilometers outside Moscow. Around 30,000 years ago, a nomadic band buried two children, roughly 10 and 12 years old, head to head in a single grave. Physical analysis showed both had severe bone deformities. One of them could barely walk. They were buried with over 10,000 individually carved mammoth ivory beads. Experimental archaeologists have timed how long it takes to carve, drill, and polish a single bead by hand. About 45 minutes. For this one grave, that's roughly 7,500 hours of labor. From a small group of people who needed every hour of daylight to hunt and gather just to stay alive. They spent thousands of hours anyway, on two children who could never have been their best hunters, their fastest runners, their strongest providers. That's not merit. That's not survival logic at all. That's status passed down through blood, not earned through ability, which means the world's oldest luxury goods weren't just decorations. They were proof that some humans, tens of thousands of years before kings, before writing, before money, had already decided that some lives were born more valuable than others. And this pattern doesn't stop in the Ice Age. It just gets more absurd. 6,000 years ago, in the Italian Alps, people climbed above 2,000 meters, into air so thin and cold the quarries were only workable for a few weeks each summer, to find a rare green stone called jadite, harder than steel. They spent over 1,000 hours grinding a single axe head smooth using nothing but sandstone, water, and quartz sand. Then they didn't chop anything with it. Researchers have traced these axes traveling over 1,700 kilometers from that one alpine quarry, all the way to Ireland, Scotland, Spain, and Denmark. One was found lying next to a wooden trackway in England, perfectly polished, never used once, deliberately laid down as an offering to a swamp. People carried a rock over 1,000 miles, spent a month of labor perfecting it, and then buried it in mud on purpose, because its entire value was in the fact that it was useless. And 4,000 years ago in Iran, after a flash flood tore open an ancient cemetery, archaeologists found a tiny carved stone tube. Inside it, a dark red paste. When they ran it through modern lab equipment, they found a near-identical recipe to expensive lipstick sold today. Iron oxide for the red, manganese minerals to shift it toward a fashionable plum, and, remarkably, none of the lead that other Bronze Age cosmetics were packed with. Someone, 4,000 years ago, already understood that you shouldn't put poison on your mouth. The tube itself was carved to a standardized shape, designed to be held and applied the exact same way every time. Which means someone wasn't just making makeup. They were building a brand. So what was the first luxury? It wasn't gold. It wasn't silk. It wasn't anything you could eat, wear for warmth, or use to kill dinner. It was a signal. Eagle talons that said, I survived something that could kill me. Shells that said, I traveled further than you. Glittering dust that said, look at me, not them. Beads that said, you owe me a favor. And tiny bones on a dead child that said, this family matters, whether they can hunt or not. Every luxury brand you've ever seen, every logo people pay extra just to display, every object that exists purely to be noticed, is running on software that's at least 130,000 years old. Every civilization that came after simply inherited the same instinct and gave it better tools. The Egyptians had gold. The Romans had silk from the other side of the planet. We have logos stitched onto fabric that costs 10 times more for the exact same cotton. None of it is new. It's the same eagle talon, the same glittering dust, the same useless rock carried 1,000 miles, just wearing a different century. We didn't invent the desire to be seen. We just found new materials to prove it with.